Welcome back to Straight Talk. I'm John Downs in for Adrian Batra. Well, to the dismay of many, perhaps, Barack Obama has decided that sports stars should really be speaking out a little more when it comes to social issues. They're not there just to, sink baskets or score goals or any of that. We went through a long stretch. With well-paid athletes, the notion was just be quiet, get your endorsements, and don't make waves. LeBron, I assume he's talking about the basketball player, is an example of a young man who has, in his own way and in a respectful way, tried to say, I'm part of society too, and focus attention. I'd like to see more athletes do that, not just around the issue, but around a range of issues. So Barack Obama talking specifically about LeBron James wearing this T-shirt that says, I can't breathe, as a form of protest, I guess we can say. I'm a little amazed, Marissa Semke and JJ McCullough, that he's allowed to do that. I would have thought you'd have to wear a jersey, but that surprised me. Was it during game last week?
Yeah, I suppose he is allowed to do it. LeBron James, I will say, when I saw this T-shirt, he wasn't the only person to wear this T-shirt. I guess there are a number of basketball players that wore the T-shirt, I can't breathe. And while to a certain extent, I do think that message, without context, almost perpetuates this sort of narrative that there's some sort of systemic form of violence in a police force, I will say it's admirable as a way of protesting what happened, whether or not you think it's right or it was justified. But LeBron James, I will say, because the first thing that came to my mind when I saw this was, okay, well, since that incident happened, which was a very contentious incident, how many black kids were gunned down in the slums of Chicago? And why hasn't he spoken about that? Why hasn't he worn a T-shirt about that?
You always like to deflect on those things, don't you?
I'm not deflecting.
It's a valid point, it's a valid point
because
this thing has been...
Those people are not in positions of authority, JJ.
No, but the point is that these very small-scale, isolated incidents, of which there are very, very few, are being inflated into this idea that this is the greatest crisis facing black America right now. The idea of what happened to Eric Garner, which is everyone in America seems to acknowledge is an unmistakable tragedy. The idea that little isolated episode is now being inflated into this totemic representation of something that black America has to face every day, that they sort of live in perpetual fear of being choked to death by, cops who are just out to kill black people for the sake of doing so. I do think it is fundamentally irresponsible for a man of his standing in the black community to play into that trope, and for the President of the United States to sort of not call him out on it.
But JJ, how do you say this is an isolated incident? Because this happened to have been caught on tape for all of us to see. I don't think it's very isolated at all as far as police
do you know how many
using
black
disproportionate...
Do you know how many black people die in New York City every year killed by cops? It's about 6. And even if every single one of those was killed completely unjustifiably, still you could say that 9/11 is still a bigger net killer of black youth in New York City than cops are. I mean, you have to view these things in the statistical reality. And the fact that these stories are so sensationalistic and they get so much play in the media doesn't necessarily mean that they actually are as sort of universal as they're being portrayed as.
Moreover, in the span of a decade, more whites have died being shot by police than blacks. Now, granted, there is a larger percentage of whites in America. That's still a telling statistic.
Okay, I still think both of you are neglecting the whole idea that these are people in power with guns who are taking down
Police have done more
to
protect the black community than anyone else.
Oh, you're really reading from the playbook today. But what about the fact this is not just about police and their treatment of blacks? This is Barack Obama saying when it comes to social issues in general, athletes should be saying more. Are they really educated enough to be saying as much as they do?
I don't
know. They vary.
I don't disagree. Sorry, JJ. I don't disagree at all. I think because you are given that platform, you're in a position to actually tell good news and you're in a position to influence young people. And because you've been given that platform, absolutely you should be speaking out. I just don't necessarily... Sorry.
Go, JJ.
No. I was just going to say that I think that there is a problem on the progressive left these days where they sort of figure that every single realm of society has to be politicized, so that there should never be any sort of escape from politics at any stage of life. And I think that there is a lot of resentment to the idea that you cannot enjoy, sports or movies or anything anymore without being bombarded with constant political messaging. And I think that oftentimes these kind of entertainment things are things we go to get away from political messaging, not to be exposed to more of it. And I think
JJ,
that is something that I have a bit of a problem with.
Is it not more admirable to be pitching a social cause as opposed to a pair of sneakers?
Do it on a different time. Do it on your own time. Do it when you're being interviewed by Sports Illustrated or whatever. Don't do it on the game court.
Okay,
that's when people go to have an escape from this kind of stuff.
Well, maybe they don't necessarily want an escape. Maybe they do want to know what people are saying. Marissa, look, it comes down to the fact that you're on the court. You are actively pitching your shoes, the jersey as well, a whole bunch of other things. Why can't you also be pitching a message?
I disagree with JJ in that, because I think that there's always a time and place to be able to perpetuate or to push a particular message. I just think this particular message, quite frankly, is irresponsible because it plays into that narrative that he and I were just discussing, which is that there's a big problem in the police force, and the police force is obviously there's some systemic presence of racism in the police force.
So it's okay to push a social issue as long as you,
I just think that the Eric Garner case requires more context than a T-shirt that says "I can't breathe."
Well, I don't know, JJ. Do we not have enough context for that?
Well, as I said, I don't know. Frankly, I don't think we have enough context for that, because I think that the message that he's trying to portray assumes a certain level of ignorance in the black audience that he's pandering to. He's trying to perpetuate a message that is essentially based on ignorance of the situation, based on a certain ignorance that, as I said, that this is in fact a huge killer of black youth, police brutality against unarmed young black men, when the statistics suggest that it is just not the case at all.
You made an assumption,
it's irresponsible.
You made an assumption he's pandering to young black men.
I think that's exactly what he is. I mean, he's a role model to that community, so his message is primarily targeted at them. And I suppose making white people feel guilty for not being harder on this supposed phenomenon.
Why can't someone wear a T-shirt and the message be a little more
I just think that we're focused on one segment when the discussion should be much broader. We're focused on one segment and one particular instance of police misconduct when the discussion should be much broader. And why hasn't anyone said to him, well, wait a minute, what about the black-on-black crime that happens in the slums of Chicago?
Either of you. No one says we shouldn't try to fight lupus because cancer is a bigger killer.
No, but you have to have context. I mean, that's true. But nobody would also say that, we should go around raising money for, people that get hit by asteroids or something. Like, at some point, it becomes too obscure and too minor, and you sort of start to raise valid questions. Well, maybe you have warped priorities.
If you're a white boy in Vancouver, if you're a black kid on the south side of Chicago, are you telling me you don't think you'd be a little more aware or cognizant of the treatment that you received by police?
Well, if that was the case that was being made, I would say completely that would be justified. If you're saying that police are maybe overly suspicious of black youth, then that's fine. But that is not the argument that's being made. The argument that's being made is that white cops are killing black people all across America, and that is not borne out by reality.
And the
Innocent black people.
And the reality is that there are 8,000 or 9,000 deaths a year of African Americans in the United States, and 93% of that or more is black-on-black crime.
All right, so black people are responsible. What about the white people who are taking them down, who have guns?
That you are playing into this false narrative,
I'm not playing.
John.
It's not a false narrative. It happens. Maybe
See,
not.
And I've completely just debunked this narrative,
No,
and you've just
right.
played into it.
Are you saying
black
they
people don't get treated harshly?
You've just played into
That's
this.
not the case. You're mixing so many different arguments. Are you suggesting seriously that there's a phenomenon in America of white guys just grabbing their shotguns, roaming the streets, and mowing down black people?
I think there's a phenomenon of a lot of black people all over, especially over the States, young black people who are scared if they go out every day that they might end up in a headlock and dead. And I don't think that's artificial. I don't think it's a false narrative at all.
Well,
That's based on what evidence?
You're out of time.
Wait,
You're
what evidence do you have to say that?
Sorry, Marissa,
you have no evidence.
Marissa, I'll go talk to people. How's that?
You have no.